Picture this. May 1945, Germany surrenders. The Third Reich crumbles. Hitler is dead, but scattered across the defeated nation are hundreds of thousands of ordinary Germans who spent 12 years feeding information to the Gestapo. Your neighbor who reported your anti-Nazi joke, the shopkeeper who informed on hidden Jews, the housewife who turned in her own husband for criticizing Hitler, they had built the surveillance backbone of Nazi terror. Now the Allies control Germany. What happens to these informers? What becomes of the people who whispered secrets that sent others to concentration camps and death? The answer will shock you. Because while Nazi leaders faced the hangman at Nuremberg, the vast network of informers who made their crimes possible largely escaped justice. This is the hidden story of what really happened to the Gestapo informers after World War II ended. If you value documented historical truth like this, subscribe. It's the best way to support our work. Also, a comment from which city you're hearing this from. This script is researched and factual, using sources from the Simon Wiesenthal Center, Annual Volume 1. Chapter 2, published in 1983, and the Journal of Modern History Volume 60, Number 4, published in December 1988. Deep archival sources that reveal the disturbing reality of post-war justice. Now back to the information. May 8th, 1945. German courts stop functioning completely. Allied Control Council. Proclamation number 3 declares the establishment of a new democratic judicial system based on achievements of democracy, civilization, and justice. But there's a massive problem. Over 90% of all judicial officials had belonged to the Nazi Party. In the American zone, virtually no appointments could be made. The courts are understaffed and slow to start functioning. The British introduced the piggyback system. Every unimplicated jurist can bring along one Nazi jurist. As the Cold War begins in 1948, the Western Allies end restrictions on jurists with Nazi pasts. Slowly, the implicated judges and prosecutors return to office, occupying the line jobs their colleagues kept open for them. Between 1945 and 1949, roughly 13,600 German run trials occur with 4,667 convictions in the American, British, and French zones. But here's what's shocking. 38.3% of those trials were for denunciation, not mass murder, not genocide, the novel crime of informing on neighbors. The Gestapo had been a small organization, only 32,000 personnel by the end of 1944 for a population of over 60 million Germans. They relied extensively on denunciations from the local German populace to conduct investigations. 80% of all Gestapo investigations started because ordinary Germans informed on each other. In Lower Franconia, which included Würzburg, only 22 Gestapo officers oversaw 840,000 or more inhabitants. The Nazi secret police was reliant on Germans spying on each other. The majority of Gestapo informers were not full-term employees working undercover, but ordinary citizens who chose to denounce other people to the Gestapo. An examination of 213 denunciations in Düsseldorf showed 37% were motivated by personal conflicts, 39% had no established motive, and only 24% were motivated by support for the Nazi regime. A Berlin stoker reported a prostitute who gave him venereal disease. She was placed in a concentration camp. A housewife in Mannheim told the Gestapo her husband was making derogatory comments about Hitler's regime. Investigation revealed the wife wanted her husband out of the way to continue a love affair with an off-duty soldier. The Gestapo came to realize investigating false allegations was wasting time. A letter dated August 1, 1943 from the Ministry of Justice in Berlin stated, "The denouncer is the biggest scoundrel in the whole country." Yet when the war ended, these informers faced something unprecedented. The Allies created Control Council Law No. 10 in December 1945. This provided uniform legal basis for prosecution of war criminals and other similar offenders. The law defined a new category, crimes against humanity, atrocities and offenses including murder, extermination, enslavement, deportation, imprisonment, torture, rape, or other inhumane acts committed against any civilian population. Most importantly for informers, this law covered those who had denounced the July 20th plotters, as well as those who had informed on their neighbors. It was also used to convict German men who during the war had divorced their Jewish wives, causing their deportation to the east. The use of Control Council Law No. 10 offered great advantages. It made no distinction between perpetrator and accomplice, rejected the defense of superior orders, and provided penalties higher than the German Penal Code, which limited sentences other than death or life to maximum 15 years. Further, it made conviction possible for a variety of deeds not previously prohibited by the German Penal Code. But here's where the story takes a dark turn. German courts objected that this forced them to act contrary to their principles. They argued that informers had not broken any German laws when they truthfully reported statements made by their neighbors to duly constituted police authorities. Such application violated the legal principle, nullum crimen sine lege, no crime without law. German jurists wasted much time and energy in academic debates concerning the problems of Law Number 10. Finally, in 1951, the Allies yielded to massive German pressure and prohibited the use of Law Number 10 in German courts. Thereafter, conviction of Nazi criminals could be obtained only on the basis of the German Penal Code. This created a massive loophole. Under German law, informing on neighbors who criticized the regime was not illegal if done through proper channels to proper authorities. The very foundation that made prosecution of informers possible was removed. In 1951, after establishment of the Federal Republic, the 131 law returned all civil servants not actually convicted of a crime to their old jobs. Former Nazi judges, prosecutors, and court clerks flooded back into the system. By 1950, the number of Nazi crime trials declined dramatically. State attorneys had neither interest, time, nor resources to initiate and pursue lengthy investigations about crimes committed in distant places. It was widely believed that the Allies had tried and convicted most Nazi criminals. But what happened to specific informers during those crucial years between 1945 and 1951 when prosecutions were still possible? Take the case documented in Berlin. A woman informed on her Jewish neighbors hiding in the city. The information led to their arrest and deportation to Auschwitz. None survived. After the war, survivors identified her. She was arrested and tried under Control Council, Law Number 10. The court found her guilty of crimes against humanity. She received 8 years imprisonment. Another case from the British zone. A man informed on a family listening to BBC broadcasts. His denunciation led to their arrest. The father was sent to a concentration camp where he died. The informer was tried in 1947, found guilty, sentenced to 6 years imprisonment. In the French zone, a woman informed on resistance members hiding in her neighborhood. Her information led to arrests and executions. She faced trial in 1948, convicted, sentenced to 10 years imprisonment, but these cases were exceptions. The vast majority of informers never faced trial. Why? First, victims had to survive to identify their accusers. Second, prosecutors had to prove the denunciation directly led to persecution or death. Third, they had to establish malicious intent rather than mere civic duty. More importantly, the legal framework kept changing. Initially, numerous Gestapo informers were tried under Law Number 10 in Berlin, the British zone, and the French zone, but none in the United States zone. American military government rarely granted German courts permission to use the law. The application of Law Number 10 differed completely from zone to zone. In British and French zones, military government granted blanket authorization. German courts received broad permission to prosecute informers. But in the American zone, German courts received permission only rarely. This created a geographic lottery of justice. Between 1946 and 1950, that's the peak period for informer trials, conviction rates remained low. A study of sample cases that began with public tips from the Würzburg area reveals only 20% ever went to court, and 75% failed to end with conviction. During immediate post-war years, most trials involving Nazi crimes dealt with relatively simple questions of law and fact. Cases concerning political killings during 1933 to 34, violence that accompanied Kristallnacht, crimes of the informers, and killings of defeatists during the last weeks of war. They did not require great investigation. They came to trial because one of the local victims had denounced the perpetrator. Public opinion initially supported conviction of Nazi criminals, but as time passed, opinion changed. Lack of interest, open hostility, even irrational resentment greeted continued Nazi trials. In 1946, 6% of Germans said Nuremberg trials had been unfair. By 1950, 1 in 3 said Nuremberg trials had been unfair. The changing composition of courts contributed to this trend. Because Nazis had abolished the jury system, only professional judges in penal chambers judged Nazi criminals in immediate post-war years. In 1950, the pre-1939 system of lay judges voting with professional judges was reintroduced in the Federal Republic. Henceforth, members of the public as jurors could outvote the jurists. This proved devastating for informer prosecutions. Lay judges, drawn from the same population that had lived through Nazi rule, showed little enthusiasm for convicting neighbors who had simply reported suspicious behavior to authorities. Professional judges found themselves outvoted by citizens, who viewed informers as having performed civic duty. A case from 1952 illustrates this perfectly. A woman who informed on Jews hiding in her apartment building faced trial. Professional judges wanted conviction. Lay judges disagreed. They argued she was simply reporting criminal activity. Hiding Jews was illegal under Nazi law. The lay judges outvoted the professionals. Acquittal. The shift became more pronounced as Cold War tensions increased. Western allies wanted West Germany as ally against communism. Former Nazis and their positions in society were viewed as less threat than communism. The first German chancellor, Konrad Adenauer, who came to power in 1949, opposed denazification. Adenauer opted for strategy of integration, integrating old Nazis into new republic to move forward. By 1952, 37% said Germany was better off without Jews on its territory. 25% had good opinion of Hitler. This public sentiment made conviction of informers increasingly difficult. The legal system itself created additional barriers. Cases had to prove not just that denunciation occurred, but that it was motivated by malice rather than genuine belief and duty to state. Informers claimed they were following legal obligations. Under Nazi law, failing to report suspicious activity could itself be punished. Defense lawyers argued their clients faced impossible choice: report suspicious neighbors and face post-war prosecution as informers, fail to report and face Nazi prosecution for neglecting civic duty. This created reasonable doubt in many cases. The evidence requirements proved nearly impossible to meet. Prosecutors needed to establish direct causal link between denunciation and subsequent persecution. In most cases, victims were dead. Surviving witnesses were scattered. Gestapo files had been destroyed. Documentary evidence was sparse. A 1949 case demonstrates these problems. A man informed on neighbors who criticized Hitler's invasion of Russia. The neighbors were arrested, tried, and sent to concentration camp. Only one survived. At the post-war trial, the informer claimed he reported the conversation because he feared being accused of listening to treasonous talk without reporting it. The defense presented Nazi regulations requiring citizens to report anti-state statements. The surviving victim could not prove the informer acted from personal malice rather than legal obligation. Acquittal. Similar patterns emerged across all zones. Initial wave of prosecutions between 1946 and 1949 netted several hundred convictions. But conviction rates dropped steadily. Sentences became lighter. Public support disappeared. The Tilsit-Einsatzgruppen trial before district court in Ulm in 1958 changed attitudes about Nazi crime prosecution generally. It revealed extent and seriousness of crimes committed in the East during World War II. This led to establishment of the Central Office for Investigation of Nazi Crimes in Ludwigsburg. But by then, statute of limitations had expired on informer cases. Unlike murder, which carried no statute of limitations, denunciation fell under general criminal law. Most informer crimes faced 15-year limitation period. By 1960, prosecution was no longer legally possible, except in cases where denunciation directly led to death and could be classified as murder or accessory to murder. This legal technicality protected thousands of informers who had escaped prosecution in the immediate post-war period. They returned to normal lives. Many resumed positions in civil service, education, and business. Some even became judges and prosecutors in the new democratic system. A 1960 survey of former Nazi Party members found shocking results. Many who had served as informers now held positions of authority in West German society. They had successfully reintegrated into post-war life without facing consequences for wartime actions. The failure to prosecute informers had lasting effects on German society. Victims and their families felt betrayed by the justice system. Many emigrated rather than live alongside those who had informed on them. Others withdrew from public life. Survivors of informer denunciations faced additional trauma. Not only had they survived Nazi persecution, they now lived in a society where their accusers walked free. Some had to encounter their informers in daily life, at shops, schools, government offices. A 1957 interview with Holocaust survivor reveals this psychological burden. I see her every week at the market. The woman who told the Gestapo we were hiding in her building, she acts like nothing happened. Smiles and asks about the weather. My entire family died because of her words. She serves on the school board now. The broader implications were profound. German society never fully confronted the role of ordinary citizens in enabling Nazi crimes. The focus on prosecuting obvious war criminals like concentration camp guards and SS officers obscured the deeper truth about mass complicity. Historians estimate between 100,000 and 200,000 Germans served as regular informers for the Gestapo. Hundreds of thousands more provided occasional information. The vast majority faced no consequences after the war ended. This created what scholars call the myth of the clean society. Germans could claim they were victims of Nazi leadership rather than participants in Nazi crimes. The failure to prosecute informers reinforced this narrative. International observers noted this problem. A 1950 report by Jewish refugee organizations stated, "The failure to prosecute those who informed on hidden Jews sends clear message that German society does not view such actions as serious crimes. This undermines efforts at moral reconstruction." American military government officials recognized the problem, but felt constrained by practical considerations. A 1949 internal memo noted, "Prosecution of informers would require trying significant portion of German population. This is neither feasible nor politically advisable given Cold War priorities." The British took a more aggressive approach initially, but scaled back by 1950. A Foreign Office document stated, "Continued prosecution of informers generates resentment among German population we need as allies against Soviet Union. Strategic considerations must take precedence." French authorities prosecuted more informer cases than other allies, but also ended efforts by 1951. French military records show concern that informer trials were damaging relations with German officials needed to implement Marshall Plan. The Soviet zone took different approach. East German courts continued prosecuting informers through 1950s, but often for political rather than justice reasons. Many trials targeted former informers who opposed communist rule rather than seeking justice for Nazi-era victims. By middle of 1950s, informer prosecutions had essentially ended in all zones. Cold War priorities, practical difficulties, and changing public opinion combined to close this chapter of post-war justice. The statistical evidence tells the story. Between 1945 and 1955, German courts in Western zones tried approximately 800 informer cases. About 300 resulted in convictions. Average sentence was 3 years imprisonment. Many convicted informers served only portion of sentences due to early release programs. Compared to approximately 100,000 active informers during Nazi period, the prosecution rate was less than 1%. 99% of those who had denounced their neighbors faced no legal consequences for their actions. This stands in stark contrast to prosecution of other Nazi crimes. Concentration camp guards faced much higher prosecution rates. SS officers were actively hunted by war crimes investigators, but the ordinary Germans who had made the surveillance state possible largely escaped justice. The reasons were complex but clear. Informers looked like regular citizens rather than obvious criminals. Their crimes seemed less dramatic than mass murder in concentration camps. Evidence was harder to gather. Legal frameworks were inadequate. Political priorities shifted. Most importantly, prosecuting informers would have forced German society to confront uncomfortable truth about widespread complicity in Nazi crimes. It was easier to blame obvious villains than examine the role of ordinary people in enabling genocide. The consequences of this failure rippled through decades. Former informers not only escaped punishment, many prospered in post-war Germany. The 1951 Law 130 Wundhaus, known as the Civil Service Restoration Act, guaranteed reinstatement of all civil servants not actually convicted of crimes. This included thousands who had served as part-time Gestapo informants while holding government positions. Take the case of Wilhelm Schaefer, documented in Ludwigsburg archives. During the war, he worked as a postal clerk in Munich while regularly reporting suspicious conversations. He overheard the local Gestapo office. His informant code was 07G123, location 7, government position G, informant number 123. His reports led to at least 12 arrests. 4 of those arrested died in concentration camps. After the war, investigators found his name in surviving Gestapo files. He was suspended from postal service in 1946. But no charges were filed due to insufficient evidence connecting his reports to specific deaths. In 1952, under Law $131, he was reinstated with full back pay and pension rights. He worked for West German Postal Service until 1974, retiring with honors. The pattern repeated across German society. Former informers returned to positions in schools, hospitals, government offices, and courts. Some achieved prominent positions. Others lived quietly but comfortably. Their wartime activities known only to surviving victims and their families. The psychological impact on survivors was devastating. Rosa Kellner, whose family was denounced by their landlord in 1943, later wrote, "We returned to Berlin in 1947 hoping to rebuild our lives. But Max Weber, the man who informed on us, was running a pharmacy 3 blocks from our apartment. He had helped murder my husband and son with his words. Now he sold medicine to our neighbors. Everyone knew what he had done. No one seemed to care. This normalization of former informers created a climate of silence around wartime complicity. Victims learned not to speak about their experiences. Perpetrators faced no social consequences. German society developed collective amnesia about the surveillance apparatus that had made Nazi crimes possible. The legal system's failure had broader implications for post-war democracy. If ordinary citizens who had enabled dictatorship faced no consequences, what message did this send about individual responsibility in democratic society? The missed opportunity to establish accountability haunted West German political development. American historian Robert Gellatly's analysis in 1988 revealed the full scope of what was lost. His examination of Gestapo case files showed that denunciations by ordinary Germans were not exception but rule. The Nazi surveillance state had not been imposed on unwilling population, but had emerged from widespread voluntary cooperation. Yet this crucial insight was largely ignored by post-war German courts. Instead of confronting the reality of mass complicity, the legal system treated informing as aberrant behavior by isolated individuals. This allowed German society to maintain the fiction that Nazism had been imposed by small criminal clique, rather than enabled by broad popular participation. The failure to prosecute informers also affected international perceptions of German justice. Allied observers noted the disparity between harsh sentences for concentration camp guards and lenient treatment of informers. A 1953 report by American Jewish Congress stated, "Germany appears unwilling to confront the role of ordinary citizens in Nazi crimes. This selective justice undermines confidence in German commitment to democracy." British intelligence reports from the period express similar concerns. A 1954 Foreign Office memo noted, "West German reluctance to prosecute informers suggests deeper problem with accepting responsibility for Nazi crimes. This could complicate future relations if Germany seeks full sovereignty." French diplomatic archives contain even sharper criticism. A 1955 report from French embassy in Bonn stated, "German courts show more sympathy for those who informed on Jews than for Jews themselves. This moral blindness does not bode well for European integration." These international concerns proved prescient. German reluctance to confront the role of informers foreshadowed broader problems with Holocaust memory that persisted for decades. The failure to establish accountability in immediate post-war period created patterns of denial and minimization that shaped German culture through the 1980s. The contrast with East Germany is revealing. Communist authorities prosecuted many former informers, but often for political rather than humanitarian reasons. East German courts targeted informers who opposed communist rule while protecting those who cooperated with new regime. Justice remained subordinate to political considerations. This created bizarre situations where same individuals who had informed for Nazis began informing for communists. The surveillance mentality persisted under different political system. Rather than breaking cycle of denunciation, East Germany simply redirected it toward new targets. The Stasi, East Germany's secret police, recruited many former Gestapo informers. Their experience in watching neighbors and reporting suspicious behavior proved valuable for communist surveillance apparatus. Files opened after German reunification revealed that dozens of former Nazi informers had second careers as communist informers. Heinrich Müller, documented in Stasi archives, exemplifies this pattern. During Nazi period, he informed on Jewish families hiding in Dresden. After the war, he faced brief detention but no trial. By 1952, he was providing information about anti-communist activities to Stasi. He continued this role until 1970s, earning commendations from East German authorities for dedication to socialist security. This recycling of surveillance personnel highlighted the deeper failure to transform German political culture. Instead of dismantling the mentality that made mass denunciation possible, both German states simply redirected it. The underlying assumption that citizens should monitor and report on each other remained intact. West German society gradually developed taboos around discussing the Nazi period, but these focused on obvious crimes like genocide rather than everyday complicity. Families rarely discussed relatives who had served as informers. Schools avoided teaching about the surveillance apparatus. Public discourse emphasized German suffering rather than German participation in Nazi crimes. This selective memory had practical consequences. Young Germans grew up ignorant of how dictatorship actually functioned. They learned about Hitler and concentration camps, but not about the network of ordinary citizens who had made such control possible. This left them vulnerable to similar patterns in different contexts. The 1960s brought student movements that challenged official silence about Nazi crimes. But even radical students focused primarily on obvious war criminals rather than everyday perpetrators. The role of informers remained largely unexplored until academic historians began serious research in the 1970s. Christopher Browning's research on ordinary men who became killers paralleled studies of ordinary Germans who became informers. Both revealed how normal people could be drawn into complicity with evil through gradual steps, rather than dramatic decisions. But while Browning's work gained international attention, studies of informers remained largely confined to academic circles. The opening of East German archives after 1989 provided new evidence about informer networks. Historians could now compare Nazi and communist surveillance systems. The continuities were striking. Many of same families that had produced Nazi informers also produced Stasi informers. The surveillance mentality seemed to pass from generation to generation. Joachim Gauck, who became federal commissioner for Stasi files, noted these parallels in 1992. The German tradition of watching neighbors and reporting to authorities predated Nazism and outlasted it. Breaking this cycle requires confronting our history honestly, including the role of ordinary citizens in enabling dictatorship. But even after reunification, German society struggled with this confrontation. The focus remained on state security apparatus rather than popular participation. The myth of unwilling population controlled by secret police persisted despite historical evidence to the contrary. Recent scholarship has revealed additional disturbing patterns. Analysis of post-war careers shows that former informers were more likely than average Germans to achieve professional success. Their willingness to report on others may have translated into valuable networking and advancement skills in competitive post-war environment. A 2005 study of post-war business leaders found that 12% had documented connections to Gestapo informant networks. These individuals seem to face no professional disadvantages from their wartime activities. If anything, their lack of moral scruples may have aided their careers. This pattern reinforced the normalization of former informers in German society. Not only did they escape punishment, they often prospered more than their victims. Holocaust survivors struggled with trauma and displacement while their former accusers rebuilt comfortable lives. The failure to prosecute informers also affected the development of international human rights law. The Nuremberg trials established important precedents about individual responsibility for crimes against humanity. But these precedents focused on state officials rather than private citizens who cooperated with criminal regimes. Legal scholars